Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Sterling Live. My name is Caitlin Brower. I'm Sterling's social media manager and your host today for this episode. As you can see, I have two amazing guests at the top above me on the screen and for today's episode. Honestly, I just want to go ahead and get right into it because we've got a great episode for everyone today. So I'll go ahead and introduce my guests. So first, she's been on Sterling Live many times before, so I'm happy to have her back. We have Katie Zwetzig, Executive Director of Sterling Volunteers. And also today we have Sharron Corle, Director of Learning and Development for Meals on Wheels America. And today our topic is revitalizing volunteer connection and purpose. Katie and Sharron, thank you so much for joining me today. Katie, can you go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience? Say a little bit more about your role, our mission, and then, our partnership with Meals on Wheels.
That's great. Yeah, thanks. And hello, everybody. My name is Katie Zwetzig, and I'm Executive Director of Sterling Volunteers. And I always like to start with our mission. At Sterling Volunteers, our mission is to build out communities of vetted volunteers and reduce the time and inefficiencies in onboarding those volunteers. And we do that through a myriad of ways. We're actually the only organization, background screening company that focuses specifically on the nonprofit sector. So our folks are trained in that sector. And, when we started back in 2013, we did so with many partnerships. And one of the first ones was Meals on Wheels and their network of millions of volunteers and serving 2.4 million seniors and so forth. And it's been a wonderful partnership, and we're really grateful.
Yeah, I'm so excited to, dive into the partnership a little bit more today. And I'm so happy that Meals on Wheels is here today, being represented by Sharron. Thank you so much, Sharron, for joining us. Can you go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience?
Well, sure. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for inviting me. This is such an honor. We value the partnership with Sterling, and I loved your mission of having efficiency in the onboarding, because I think folks know that volunteers are the lifeblood of the Meals on Wheels programs, right? They deliver the meals, they provide a friendly conversation, they do the safety check, they connect homebound seniors to kind of community referrals in their community. They're just so important. And, they having an efficient way to kind of onboard them is really necessary. And I think programs struggle with that, and that evolves constantly. As you mentioned, I'm the Learning and Development Director at Meals on Wheels America. I've been there 6.5 years, and I've had the honor of managing our learning portfolio. So anything that we do that kind of helps members grow, sustain, innovate, whatever their programs, learn from each other, learn from subject matter experts, and that's virtual learning, on-demand learning, conference. It's kind of evolved over the past 2 years since everything has been in person. It's kind of crazy. It's fun though, always being creative. I'm trying to meet the broad membership needs. We've got members in every community, geographical region, urban, rural, suburban. It's big programs, small programs. You have a lot of diversity there. The one thing they have in common is delivering the meals and the use of volunteers. All of them pretty much use volunteers.
Well, thank you for that. And thank you for joining us today. I must say, our volunteers episodes are some of my favorite episodes on Sterling Live. It just really brings a lot of good, conversation, really good, some feel good content. And I must say, I love Meals on Wheels. I've volunteered for them many times. So it's a great organization. So really excited to continue this conversation on today's episode. So I want to take this time to remind our audience, if you are watching live on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube, you can ask questions throughout the show to both Katie and Sharron. You just go to the comment section across all of the 3 of these platforms and submit your question, your commentary, anything, and I'll get them over to our guests as I see fit throughout the show. So let's go ahead and get into it. So Sharron, I want to come to you first, specifically talking about Meals on Wheels America, and more in detail of, the revival from COVID-19. So what is the current state of Meals on Wheels America?
So I think it's interesting. It kind of varies across our membership. As I mentioned, we've got members in every geography, and the COVID restrictions impacted them all pretty similarly, but of course there's state and local restrictions. Some programs are completely going back to kind of pre-COVID days, except they're serving more people now. And others, they're not even fully back to opening. And those are largely the congregate programs. The congregate programs are the ones where seniors come in a space like a senior center or a library to meet, have a meal, and then kind of interact with each other. Those, because of COVID and things not fully being back, are not fully open. And it was interesting just kind of watching the struggles at the beginning of the epidemic, as as a lot of the volunteers who were seniors themselves in the programs were homebound because of the risk of the virus. So the programs lost these volunteers. They had more clients now because some of the client, their volunteers became their clients. So I think we're seeing that we're getting on the other side of that, right? I think programs are kind of really excited about coming back to like our in-person conference. So I know people are up and traveling, and they're seeing just more, I guess, being more hopeful about kind of where things are, which is a good thing, because there was a lot of, uncertainties going on during that whole phase for all of us, but particularly for programs. Are they going to be able to continue to operate at that kind of level? Some programs had hundreds of % increase in clients that were on their rosters, and struggling with a lot, recruiting volunteers because everyone was kind of terrified of the pandemic. So I think we're seeing the other side of that. Although I did put out a call on our community thing today, and I said, well, tell me a little bit about what you're dealing with volunteers. And some of the comments on there were still kind of struggling with recruiting, still kind of struggling with kind of getting back to the pre-pandemic days. So, I think it's like anything. We're not going to just bounce back and get to wherever, right? It's going to take some time. And the wherever now is going to be very different than the wherever of 2020. Same with us. We're all different people than we were 2 years ago, and I just think, we just have to kind of be patient with the change and what that's going to look like.
Yeah, ever evolving and changing for sure. And like you said, something in a couple months might look completely different than what we're looking at now. But I do see definitely the encouragement, as you said, coming over on the other side of certain things. So it's really great to hear. You mentioned the word hopeful. So I'm wondering, what are some other mindset, what are you seeing mindset wise from leaders and members right now?
What I've seen in our programs, which is incredible, is the looking at this as an opportunity to reinvent themselves. So many of the programs, like, they took on things that they had wanted to do. They had wanted to do, but they couldn't find the time. But now COVID kind of forced them to do it. And that's like revitalizing their meal delivery. So a lot of them will do hybrid with a hot meal and frozen meals. They had wanted to go to frozen meals, but, just didn't have the time to kind of figure that out. But with COVID, it was easier to do that. So now they're like, wow, we have a whole, different delivery model. Our meals are different. We were able to kind of revitalize that, and they're going to keep that. Some of them revise their delivery schedules to 3 days a week instead of 5. That actually impacts kind of the need for so many volunteers, right? And they're not going to go back. Their clients love it. They love it. It's definitely opened up opportunities. Likewise, the volunteer opportunities themselves, kind of reimagining those. So, some of the programs got into doing kind of virtual volunteering. A lot of that was like telephone connection, and they're going to keep that. They're absolutely going to keep that because it's an effective way to use volunteers, right? I could call you anytime that I have, I schedule, I'm going to call you and say, hey, how you doing? And in fact, one of the comments that I had when I posted on Connect was, they have a family that does the telephone connecting. The entire family does it. And they actually did their telephone calls when they were on a cruise recently. You could do it anywhere at any time. And I just thought that was so cute. But yeah, it gave them the opportunity to kind of reimagine themselves. And what can we do instead of what can't we do? Like that to me was like super helpful. And so that kind of reinvention, reimagination, looking at innovation, looking at ways that, they're going to keep some of those successes. So going back to volunteers, there's programs that used to do all of their volunteer training in person. And that was like, painful. Now they have transitioned to doing all of their volunteer training online, and they're never going back. They're like, we love this so much. So it has forced, in some ways, also encouraged or supported some of those innovations or reinventions or awesome ideas that programs had, and they came to life because of COVID. So that kind of like silver lining in the cloud is what a lot of programs took away from that.
I love the like kind of the dual mindset of, being aware of what you can't do, being optimistic of changing things around and what we can do. So I thought that was really important for you to bring up, because like I had said earlier, I love these volunteers episode because a lot has changed over the last, 2 years. And while things might not always look great, there are things that we can do to continue to give back, to continue to volunteer and help. So I think that's really important, that mindset for you to bring up there. So with that being said, have you found that, you have to like rekindle, rework, revisit, the purpose of volunteering for Meals on Wheels?
Yeah, I think what a great question. We had a volunteer. So every year in April, it's, Volunteer Recognition Week. And we do events. Last year we had, 5 Tuesdays. It was like join us at 2 on Tuesdays. And we had a webinar that kind of addressed different things. This past year, we did like a mini conference. So it was like a half day event where it was just like back-to-back sessions. And one of them was kind of back to basics, because a lot of programs were looking at kind of reinventing or reimagining their volunteer programs and what that was going to look like. We went back to basics. What does, recruitment look like? What does retention look like? What does recognition look like in this new realm? It's like before it used to be kind of traditional, we recruit and then our volunteer recognition is like a volunteer luncheon. And, you can't do that when there's COVID and you're not allowed to kind of get together. And so getting back to basics, okay, we're building our volunteer program brick and mortar again, and that was exciting. And we had maybe close to 500 folks signed up for this volunteer symposium, which is incredible, the numbers, but that lets you see the interest in kind of like, hey, we're constantly looking at kind of reinventing and reimagining our volunteer program. And, this is a prime opportunity. And I think the nature of the volunteers has changed so much. I think I mentioned earlier that the average age of the volunteers, it was a lot of retirees, because who has time to volunteer, to deliver lunch from 11 to 2? It's not a lot of people that are working, in a traditional job. And so, when they lost those volunteers, they had to kind of rethink what that looked like. So yeah, there's a lot of revitalization and reimagining and, new ways of doing things. And that's exciting, always when you're either forced to change or you look at an opportunity to take advantage of, an opportunity to change. Those are always good things, I think.
Of course. And with, these changes, we're clearly going to see some shifts in, volunteer recruitment, engagements. That's where I want to go next with the two of you. So I want both of you to answer this question, but Sharron, I'll come to you first. What growth opportunities are you seeing for volunteer programs? Are you seeing any new CSR, DEI partnerships, anything else?
Yeah, so there's a lot of like hybrid volunteer opportunities that are happening, and I think they're looking at younger volunteers. I think there is a huge interest in recruiting volunteers that are more reflective of the communities they serve. And so a lot of interest in kind of like, how do we recruit volunteers that look like our population? If our population is largely Hispanic or Vietnamese, how do we get those volunteers? How do we build those relationships in those communities so that we become a trusted resource and that, people are willing to kind of volunteer for us? And so those are things that I'm seeing an upsurge in the past couple of years, is that real kind of interest in DEI, diversity, equity and inclusion, and also just kind of, virtual opportunities like joining the 21st century. And then how do you recruit younger volunteers? And, that may not be for meal delivery. That may be for other things like, hey, running your social media, or, what am I interested in? Maybe I'm interested in a fun, events and meetings. So I'm going to help you with a fundraiser, or, things like that. And that's exciting because you can really tap into a lot of different kind of energy and enthusiasm. I think the one big transition that's going to be challenging for a lot of programs is, the new volunteer, it doesn't look like the old volunteer. They're not going to be committed for the same route for, 10 years. they may only be committed to helping you with your fundraising event, and that's it. And that's okay. That still needs to be a positive experience for them, because they're ambassadors. They may know someone that, they refer to volunteer because they had such an awesome experience. That is your 10-year volunteer, delivering every Wednesday route. So you just never know. You never know, and you want every volunteer experience to be positive.
Yeah, and I think it's important to address that there's so many layers of volunteering for a specific organization. You do have your standard that for Meals on Wheels, everyone sees it as, delivering the meals, doing things like that. But there's so many other areas where assistance is needing, giving back is needing, needed. So I'm happy that you had mentioned that for sure. Katie, would love your thoughts here on, growth areas that you're seeing with volunteer programs.
Well, I think that Sharron hit on, all those items that we hear from our other clients. So, the younger folks don't really want to be tethered for a long-term commitment. And so finding those younger volunteers and giving them opportunities to, Sharron, I love what you said about maybe a program had 5 days of deliveries, but now they're down to 3. Finding somebody who could deliver once a month and rounding up their friends is what we're seeing, kind of a done in a day type of thing that they want to do. And I liked the word ambassadors. So our clients are reporting some of the similar things. On the virtual volunteerism, certainly here to stay. What Sharron talked about is from the organization perspective, but we also hear from our volunteers that they like the virtual too. Mm-hmm. It's so much easier to go hop on a Zoom at 4:00 in the afternoon rather than get in your car and drive 30 minutes and sit in a classroom for an hour and then drive home. And so I think that that's been a really nice thing that has come out of COVID, and it's benefited both the organizations and the volunteers. And then our organizations are also reporting a lot more fundraising. So I think there was a hit that nonprofits took in COVID and a lot of anxiety and unknowns. And so I am seeing personally more requests for funding. We're talking more about contributions on our platform. An organization can ask a volunteer to pay for their background check or make a contribution. That has ticked up considerably. And so I think that the impact of the fundraising has been an issue. I have a friend who's a grant writer, and he is really busy and hiring where he used to be a one-man show. He is now building out more folks to help him out.
Yeah, I think fundraising is a huge issue. Like I mentioned earlier, the programs during COVID, their rosters went up incredibly, and they're still not down to kind of pre-COVID levels. There are hundreds more meals a day, or, thousands more a month than they were serving pre-COVID. And that's a lot to kind of sustain that. And so the fundraising is important. I think, a lot of them are struggling with kind of the COVID fatigue. People initially gave a lot of money and were really kind of like engaged. And now it's kind of like, okay, we're been there, done that. I'm over COVID. What's next? And so just struggling with kind of how to keep the issue of senior hunger and isolation kind of at front and center when it's in the noise of other kind of also needy kind of issues. Children, child hunger or animal issues. And, everything is worth our effort, right? And it's just kind of trying to keep your niche and keep those folks that are interested in your issues. And I think programs are struggling with that.
So it's a good segue into my next question, looking at people who are interested in what your organization is doing, your values, everything like that. So I want to dive into, the recruitment and that engagement a little bit more. So Sharron, how's Meals on Wheels altered its volunteer recruitment over the last year? And then also too, engagement strategies. How have you been able to rethink those?
So we, I'm speaking on behalf of programs because we don't actually have volunteers at Meals on Wheels America, but that would be nice to have volunteers if, to help with some tasks. But, what I'm hearing from programs is it's so interesting. At the volunteer symposium, we had a panel of members, and they were talking about kind of their recruitment strategies. And one of the most popular recruitment strategies that a member program had was yard signs. Believe it or not, having a yard sign that says, we're looking for volunteers, call this number or look at this web page, right? And that was kind of crazy thinking, well, yard signs, that seems like an archaic way to get volunteers, but that was incredibly, useful. On the other side of that, you have programs that kind of really looked at that as an opportunity to revitalize their social media. And so they're really looking at social media and using TikTok and Snapchat and these things that they never even knew existed before to kind of have funny little videos to get people to volunteer. The one program they use, they have a cat, and it's a real cat. And the cat, he posts on their social media channels, and he is actually recruiting volunteers, and he talks about it. And this cat is like extremely popular. And he gets a lot of likes and he has a lot of followers. So that is kind of interesting. So you're going from the extremes of like what I consider kind of old school with the yard sign that is super, effective to social media. And then the other thing folks are doing are getting very sophisticated about video.
Yeah.
I remember years ago, that video wasn't the thing. Now they're doing kind of off the shelf videos that they could give to like their local churches or their local, wherever, their corporations that might be interested in having like, volunteers. And it's all about their program. It's like a 2-minute, hey, here's about us. Here's what we're looking for, and it's like an off the shelf video that they created themselves on an iPhone and edit it. And now they have an asset that they can give to people that makes it much easier. People watch video, YouTube, whatever, Zoom, we're all video aficionados now. And that's just, that has kind of like evolved, right? 2 years ago, I don't think we would have seen that happening. So it's kind of crazy. Just what's happening as far as recruitment. And the other strategy that works, and this is always like, I don't think this is ever going to go away, is referrals. Like I mentioned ambassadors, but like if I have an amazing experience, I'm more likely to kind of recommend that to someone else. Hey, I saw that they were looking for X, Y, and Z. I actually got my first job through a referral. I just finished my secondary education student teaching, and I realized I do not want to teach in the school system. It's like too much of a bureaucracy. And so I was volunteering with an organization, and someone there said, hey, so-and-so is looking for an education specialist. I think you should apply. And it was like, whoa, they referred me, and I ended up applying, and I got that. Now, guys, that was decades ago. So this is a process that has, been in existence and is working, and programs are still utilizing that to kind of get volunteers that are interested in their issue. Think about it. If I have a group of friends, we probably all have the same values and, interest and things like that. And so I'm going to refer people that, believe in Meals on Wheels and kind of the mission of the programs like I do. So.
Yeah, no, and it's a great point to bring up from a referral standpoint. And even in this day and age, we're talking to each other in so many different ways. So it's not the next time you see your friend out at a function and you talk about it. You can talk through social, through text, you can call them up. So there's so many different ways to talk to each other. So that's where that referral piece, comes in, and it's critical. So definitely important to talk about. So Katie, you had mentioned before that seeing from clients that people are liking this virtual hybrid world that we had to enter, a couple of years back, but now adapting it a little bit more and trying to understand on how we can advance. So I want to move into that conversation around the hybrid workforce and virtual volunteering. So Sharron, how has Meals on Wheels pivoted to that hybrid experience?
So given the nature of what a lot of the programs did, it was there was a divide there. The people that were in the offices could work virtually and remote, but the people that actually produced the meals, they had to show up and be in the kitchens. Mm-hmm. That was a lot of the kind of transition early on with staff and volunteers because of the 6-foot social distancing, the mask, just the way that they had to reorganize the kitchen to allow to have that kind of social distancing and still be kind of preparing the meals. There was a little bit of uncertainty at the beginning of whether or not Meals on Wheels was an essential business, and then it was. So then we were allowed to have volunteers come in. A lot of the volunteers didn't like wearing the mask and didn't like the social distancing at first. It was a little transition getting them to do that. And then as, programs kind of decided what they were going to do with vaccinations, they had other, challenges with volunteers that didn't want to be vaccinated or didn't want to, follow those kind of things. So it's been interesting, just the in-person volunteering side. The virtual volunteering has been, I think most programs are really happy with where they've gone, from training to, from the training aspect of volunteers, the virtually, but also having virtual opportunities. There are programs that are doing like virtual exercise classes now. Like they, you can join a Zoom link and do like chair yoga, like things they weren't doing before. That's amazing. So you have a yoga teacher like me that can like say, hey, I'm gonna volunteer my, yoga certification and training to teach a chair yoga class to your seniors. Like that just kind of leveraged their ability to kind of expand their programming, right? Because before they weren't able to do that. And the audience, the seniors, is now acclimated into doing things like that. So that's kind of exciting. So yeah, it's just been, it's been kind of crazy. And I think they're going to keep a lot of those volunteer opportunities because they've seen, people are happy with them, and like I said, it allows them to expand their programming and reach more folks. A lot of seniors are still not comfortable coming out of their homes and kind of re-engaging. And unfortunately for, a lot of our programs, the seniors they served are not really able to leave their homes. And so that really does expand their connection into the community. So think about it. That's inclusiveness. I'm on here. I'm looking at you all, but think about if I'm on a Zoom meeting with, a bunch of my community peers doing a chair yoga, I get to see everyone and interact or play bingo or something like that. So, there are a lot of good connection opportunities there for people that are homebound with some of those virtual opportunities.
So you talked about a couple of trends, which were great to bring up, of how to adapt a lot of these programs. But with, adapting and everything like that, are there any areas of improvement that, these volunteer programs that you saw over time?
Well, I think one that they would say, and I see this consistently, happening, is just the volunteer training. That's an ongoing challenge. People, they want to unpack that. Like, what does that look like? I want to have this package thing. So that's constantly an area that they're looking at improving, is just the training, onboarding, supporting. The challenge when you have all these, volunteers that might be short-term or long-term or whatever, is like, how do you really have a committed effort to make that an engaging experience for everyone? Because we all know that engagement, just like employee engagement, is what keeps people coming back, right? Feeling like I'm valued, that I belong here, that I have a space here, that I know what's expected of me here. And so how do you make that experience meaningful for all of your volunteers? I think our programs struggle with that. And then another one that came up in a previous kind of event that we did with Sterling was this whole idea of risk management. The population that Meals on Wheels volunteers serve is vulnerable. They're elderly. There's a lot of opportunities to kind of take advantage of them. And so how do you mitigate that risk? That comes up a lot. And they struggle with that because honestly, we all want to believe the best in everyone. And unfortunately, there are people that kind of take advantage of that. And our programs don't want to have that liability of the person that kind of bamboozled you, is volunteering and then kind of takes advantage of one of the clients. You never want to see that. And so that's something I think that they are constantly kind of thinking about.
Yeah.
Those are just three of the top things on the top of my head. Also recruiting younger volunteers.
Yeah. No, definitely. And I'm happy you brought up, Sterling volunteers and that, the end piece there. Because Katie, I'm wondering from you, how have we responded or helped facilitate organizations when it comes to hybrid virtual volunteer programs?
Yeah, so we've done it in a couple of ways. One is we quickly pivoted and altered our webinar series to include webinars that were on virtual volunteering and recruiting in a virtual world and so forth. And people can find those on our website. But those were fabulous, very, very well attended. And the feedback was really, really great. It was what people needed at that time. And then from a product standpoint, there was a concern. Sharron mentioned risk management. And all of a sudden you're in this virtual world and you don't know necessarily, you don't get to meet the volunteer face-to-face, check their driver's license, make sure that they are who they say they are. And so we rolled out, and we've talked about this before, Caitlin, ID.me. So Sterling has an exclusive relationship and partnership with ID.me, which is a company that validates identity. I think they have 70 million US Americans in their network already that already have been validated. And so we are overlaying that on top of a background check and finding a lot of success that people, they go through it once and we know that Katie is who Katie says, is who she says she is. And that's been really, really popular.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely helpful for sure. With the shifts, being there for our clients and everything like that. So I guess, Sharron, would it be safe to say that Meals on Wheels is going to keep this hybrid virtual approach if it still makes sense?
I think a lot of the programs are going to keep hybrid, much like Sterling. Because we serve members that are geographically distributed. Most of our educational program was virtual anyway. Mm-hmm. But kind of like that everything became virtual made you step it up. And it seemed like they were kind of changing the platforms all the time. Going back to kind of the integrity of the platforms, remember Zoom bombing? People could just join a random Zoom meeting before they had the kind of controls on there that it was private to the group that was in there. That was kind of early on in Zoom, and they didn't realize people were going to do that, right?
Yeah.
And so some of those kind of privacy things that or protection things that came up because as the virtual space kind of evolved so quickly, it would be like, one day Zoom's doing this, the next day it's doing that because they just have people working on there all the time. So we'll keep the hybrid stuff. We also developed a lot of new product lines that allowed members to talk to each other and learn from each other. In the early days, the uncertainty of, are we essential? Are we not? What can we do? What are other programs doing? We developed this whole series like town halls, right? And it was just, we brought members together to kind of talk about what they were doing and share kind of what was known. Where are people getting PCP, those masks and sanitizer. Remember the crazy, you couldn't even go buy Clorox wipes or toilet paper. That I feel like that was a dream that we all lived in, but it was reality. But, where are they finding these? How can they access these?
Right.
And then, even having conversations about the legal ramifications of requiring tests, COVID, vaccinations and stuff like that. And negative tests. I mean, we just ran the gamut with these town halls and kind of sharing information. And then, how programs were adapting and adopting and having innovations. We developed a new product line called Community Conversations. And then as programs struggled or grappled with kind of like the social, unrest of like George Floyd and other issues in 2020, we developed a series called Diversity Dialogues where members could just have a private space to kind of talk to each other about, how they were addressing kind of equity issues or diversity issues or how they were making their organization more inclusive. They could ask member questions. The only stupid question, as we used to say, is an unasked question. All questions are on the table and relevant. So yeah, we developed a whole series of product lines. So we'll keep some of those, moving post-COVID because, we want to connect members and kind of spread what's working and best practices. And some of them will transition out because they're no longer relevant in a post-COVID world. But we'll keep, obviously keep the virtual programming because that's just the way it is. In fact, our conference this year, it's interesting. We're going back in person for the first time since 2019, which is crazy because even though it's only been since 2019, it's like we forget how to do it. It used to be like a muscle for me because I did it all the time. And now I'm like, well, how do we do that? Like, I can't. But we're also having a virtual part of that. We're having a hybrid event. Because there are people that, it's like they love the virtual conferences we did over the past 2 years, and they love that kind of freedom. I can watch that whenever I want to. I can access that whenever I want to. I don't have to make myself available on Thursday, from 1 to 3. I could do it when I'm at home in the evening or early morning or whatever. I don't think you're ever going to get back from that. You're never going to return to an era of, non-flexibility. And I think that's why there's so much in the news about organizations struggling with bringing remote workers back. People love the flexibility of that, not having the commute. You mentioned that about not having the half-hour commute to drive to the volunteer training, just kind of participate virtually. You don't have to leave your house. But yeah, I think I don't think we'll ever go back to an era of non-virtual, being part of programming of whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it makes sense. It makes sense for sure. And I definitely, we can agree with you on a lot of things. Sterling Live was actually created during COVID. And it was to get information out quickly, whether it was in regards to what we were doing as a business, how we were helping our clients, just general thought leadership. And we're coming on 2 years strong of it. So I must say, I definitely agree with you on many points there. So I want to move into, we have been talking about like current state, but we have also been talking about a lot of developments over the last couple of years. So I do want to talk about, current events right now. So how has the current economic downturn impacted Meals on Wheels America, their volunteer recruiting and engagement efforts? So Sharron, obviously this is for you.
So, wow, this is a great question. We're seeing a lot of just larger supply chain issues all the way back from, I don't even know, last summer, they were having problems getting kind of cars to, the fleet vans to deliver meals because of the supply chain issues that the computer chips weren't available, and we're still seeing the ramifications of that. It's and now the food supply chain issue, they're constantly having to make, modifications in the meals. So maybe they wanted to have chicken on Tuesday, but there is no chicken to be had. So they have to kind of be able to be flexible and adaptable. And trust me, some of the clients were not happy with some of those changes because, I want my chicken, So yeah, those supply chain issues are impacting programs, and they just never know what they're going to be able to have access to, which is challenging. And then you layer over top of that inflation, which is insane. It's at a 40-year high. You have just, food prices going up exponentially. And that's a concern, especially when it's not budgeted for, right? We already have programs serving 200 to 2,000 more clients than they did previously, which impacts their budget. But now you're, layering in increased food costs. And then the third layer you have on that is freaking gas prices, which are insane. I'm in Pittsburgh, and I just saw it was $5.15, and I'm going, what? That's crazy. I fortunately, I work at home and I try to walk everywhere, but for people that need to drive and commute, that, my sister said she filled the tank of her car and it was $75, and it was just insane. Whoa,
right.
And so that's impacting our programs kind of in general, but also impacting volunteerism. Because, volunteers that might have been on the fence about volunteering now with $5.15 gas, I don't have that discretionary funding to kind of deliver meals. And it's especially a struggle in rural programs because some of those routes are 90 miles long. And so, that's way too much money for me. That's too rich for my blood to kind of, deliver. So that is increasing the struggle to kind of reinvent themselves, or reimagine their volunteer program post-COVID because, the bottom line is if I don't have, that's discretionary. That's my discretionary dollars. And I just don't have it because it's being eaten up in increased rent costs, food costs, and now gas prices. So yeah, definitely the larger environment is impacting programs. I had a colleague that was just in Spain, and she said Spain is actually looking at fining restaurants, organizations, and maybe even individuals. I need to get the details on this, but for food waste, for wasting food because of the food supply issues.
Yeah.
And I just thought, how intriguing is that? In the sustainability and environmental community, for years, we've been trying to talk to people about, food waste and how much we waste every year as Americans. 40% of our food that we buy is wasted or something. And now they're putting kind of one government, at least that I know of, is looking at putting regulations on that. And so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out as a long-term kind of strategy because, to address things like food supply issues or access. So
absolutely. Yeah. Katie, what is Sterling Volunteers seeing related to inflation impacting the nonprofit sector?
There's certainly a lot of chatter. I think what Sharron describes, it seems to me Meals on Wheels is impacted from a lot of different angles, more so than many programs. And Sharron, I have to say how you guys are handling it and your strategy around it and just your thoughtfulness is really impressive. But we're hearing, I brought up fundraising earlier. People are concerned about their fundraising dollars and how can I make more money? And should my event be virtual or not for my fundraising. I've seen a lot of organizations go to an in-person because they feel like, one, they need that connection and pull their volunteers and their constituents and stakeholders together and drive that purpose, which ultimately will drive fundraising, hopefully. So that's what we're seeing, and that's kind of the buzz around us. And I mentioned the contributions. People have turned on that contributions feature.
Mm-hmm.
When the engagement thing is so important. Like, my mom is a volunteer for a local Meals on Wheels program. She and her boyfriend, they do a congregate program. So they go to a senior center and they help serve the meals, they help clean up, and then they run the bingo and stuff like that. And for 2 years, when that program was closed down, my mom was chomping at the bit to go back there. Mm-hmm. And the one thing I will say about her manager is the volunteer manager there. They kept the volunteers in the loop. Hey, we're not going to open up yet. We're not ready. And as soon as we do, we'll connect you. And, they just had they just reopened. Then they had like a volunteer kind of lunch. And man, my mom, you could just see how happy she is to be connecting with people like that again, right? It's like she was radiant when she told me about the event and afterward, and just like getting back into volunteering like that in person, like being in that space, like you said, with the fundraising, like that just gave her energy in a different way. And I think the same thing with some of those in-person fundraising. There's a synergy of being in person that is hard to create in a virtual event, right? And there's it is really challenging to create something similar. And so I think a lot of people are looking forward to those kind of in-person things again, because of that synergy, and because they missed it. That's you're homebound for 2 years. You want to see people. You want to interact with people. You haven't had money. You haven't spent your money because you've been homebound. Maybe you want to go to a fundraising event and spend it there. I don't know.
It seems to me, Sharron, that it's easier for a nonprofit to get their mission across in person. And so a lot of the events I've gone to have some of the constituents there that you can meet and talk to. And for me, at least, it's really impactful.
You know what was getting popular before the whole COVID thing? And I'd have to look at statistics now, but these whole non-events. So instead of holding an event, you would pay to not go to the event. So like what I was going to pay to rent a tux or for a ticket, then I would just donate that to the organization. So it was like these non-events. And they were getting really popular. But I bet in this time of post-COVID, they're not really popular as much as they were, because I do think people are interested in coming back.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept. I had never heard of a non-event before, but I think
it was super popular. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's so interesting to hear. So we did touch on our partnership a little bit throughout the episode, but I want to dive into it a little bit more. Sterling Volunteers and Meals on Wheels America. So, Sterling is all about building trust and safety with our clients, our partners, everything like that. So let's talk about, that concept of building trust and safety among nonprofits, and that being like that great asset. So partnerships are so important when it comes to building trust and safety. My simple question for the two of you is do you agree with it? So Sharron, I'll start with you first.
Well, absolutely. I think, there's a vulnerability in any type of relationship, including a partnership, and both people have to kind of live up to what they promise. I can tell you from any time we've ever partnered with Sterling on a learning event that our members are like, well, first of all, so intrigued by the information that you all share about, just your product line in general, but also kind of the risk management side of that and things they didn't know that they didn't know. Right. And there's always like a million questions about, I didn't, help me out here. And so, and always just, it's illuminating when they learn more about kind of what Sterling Volunteers offers. And so we are like thrilled anytime we can highlight that in a learning event, right? Because it increases our members' awareness and information. And that partnership that we have through, Sterling Volunteers is one of our member discount program partners, to be able to offer that, what you all offer products to our members at a volume discount is awesome for them, because, they are nonprofits. They struggle. Their budgets, are stretched in a million different ways. And now, their budgets are being stretched by recruiting, staffing, and what that looks like, because we've got this great resignation and, people are making demands and asking for different things. So yeah, that partnership and being able to kind of provide something that makes our programs feel safe and secure, and like more that they don't have to create this themselves, right? You will help them to kind of assimilate some of these safety protocols and things into their into what they're doing, as far as kind of volunteer management. So that's definitely an asset in a partnership, when what you have is something our members value, right?
Yeah.
And is important to them.
Mm-hmm. And crucial point too, something we try to get across is that you don't have to do these things alone. That is why we're here.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really happy that you brought that up. Katie, what are your thoughts on this, the importance of, partnerships?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, we built our brand and our reputation and our business on partnerships. We have over 104 partnerships. But one of the things I love is I kind of view Sterling Volunteers as, hopefully somewhere in the middle of this ecosystem between partners, national partners like Meals on Wheels, and technology partners and regional partners and so forth. But what we like to do is get feedback from folks like Sharron on what they need. So Sharron, I've been taking notes, and then how can we work with our technology partners to help deliver that?
Mm-hmm.
How do what I love about the nonprofit sector is all boats rise, right? It's not competitive. It's a very collaborative sector. And if somebody has a good idea, they want everybody to know about it. And so I really view our job at Sterling Volunteers to help elevate the entire sector. And so these Sterling Lives and some of our quarterly reviews with partners and so forth really set the stage on what our technology partners want to be doing.
Absolutely. So I do have one more question for the two of you. We always have got to tie back to background screening, obviously. So Katie, can you provide an overview of background screening and identity services for volunteers? And have we seen any changes with volunteer screening?
Yeah, so we've seen an increase in people in the robustness of packages. So if you think about volunteer screening, it's very similar to employment screening. And in fact, the amount that is spent on volunteer screening is slowly rising, catching up to what a company would spend on employment screening. By and large, all of our clients buy criminal histories and sex offender registries. And the question is, how broad and deep do you go? Do you do the current county? Do you search every place that a volunteer has lived under every name and so forth? Because that robustness of going broad and deep really, really will impact a program to find out, if you ran my name, I've lived in Colorado for about 30 years, but if you ran my social security trace, you see me associated with places where my kids went to college down in Fort Worth and Dallas and Kansas City and Washington, D.C. and so forth. And I've never lived there, but we would search those should a client want us to do that. So that's really the question. And then we believe that overlaying identity on top of that to make sure that the volunteer is who they say they are is really, really critical, and do that just once through our partnership with ID.me. So we're seeing more people screening. We're seeing a resurgence of screening. We do monthly updates, but then we're also seeing renewal policies that used to be out every 5 years they'd screen. Now they're into 3, 2, 1 years. And so we're seeing more, just more robustness and more often.
Sharron, what are you seeing from an organization standpoint in regards to screening volunteers?
Well, I see a lot more interest in, figuring out how to do that. I love I don't know who shared earlier on, but asking the volunteers to pay for that themselves, because a lot of our programs struggle with, how is that paid for? Where are the funds for that? So, they do want to do it, but then they struggle with paying for it. So having different kind of payment mechanisms, but obviously the safety and security of their clients is everything to them, and it's they do know they serve a vulnerable population. So, they don't want to, have a volunteer that can't be trusted, or, might have a shady background going into the home. So yeah, this is something they are concerned about. And the interest is going up as we, see more kind of, seniors being taken advantage of and things like that. And I think you'll just continue to see that kind of interest in figuring out, how do I incorporate that into my program, and how do I kind of enhance what it is I'm already doing in my program. Because, our programs, the clients are everything. That's why they exist. That's why They want them to have the most amazing experience living in their home as long as they can, independently. That's what the meal is about, right? Is independent living. And it's about kind of ensuring that someone can stay in their home as long as possible. And so, they are motivated by all good things, like all nonprofits that are kind of like, we say, mission driven, right? And it's always, purpose and heart. So.
Of course. All right. So I do want to invite our audience, if you are watching live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, you have one final time to send any final questions, comments for both Katie and Sharron right now. As we wait for anything to come in, I do want to grab some final thoughts from the two of you on such an incredible episode, but getting to some final thoughts here. So Katie, I'll start with you on final thoughts.
Well, I guess I'm wowed, Sharron. I've spoken of how Meals on Wheels has helped break down geographical barriers through virtual volunteering. That chair yoga example is fabulous. And I think about the connection and purpose for both that volunteer, the person who's doing the chair yoga, and the people receiving those services. So I thought that was really, really creative. And if you don't mind, I might just use that and make sure that people know about that. But I'm just so impressed by the way Meals on Wheels has navigated this, looking at so many different ways and ways that you can impact your program and ultimately your stakeholders. Hats off to you.
Yeah. Hats off for sure. Sharron, final thoughts for our audience.
Well, I would say that volunteering and volunteerism is like this. It's an emerging field of like opportunity. I think that's the one thing that we're seeing is just so much opportunity to kind of reimagine what that looks like. And, I don't think we'll ever go back to the old way of volunteering, so I think that's exciting. I think that for a lot of people, that's also scary. How do I stay competitive? How do I recruit volunteers? How do I reimagine in a new environment? We're navigating new seas. And what I think is like amazing is what I've seen from our members is they're incredibly resilient. And guess what? They'll figure it out. And they'll have amazing ideas and innovative things and creativity in doing it. And that is kind of the power of kind of having a network where I can hear about all these cool things that programs are doing and share them with each other. So like you said, they're collaborative, not competitive. And so people are so willing to boost and brag. And it's like, this is wonderful because that's how you spread great ideas. And that's how the great ideas that they're spreading are only having a positive impact on the clients. And so who doesn't feel good about that?
A lot to feel good about for sure. And I must say, I feel really good about this episode. It was truly amazing to sit down with the two of you and talk, all things revitalizing volunteer connection and purpose with things that had happened previously, things that are happening right now. So I just want to, give a quick shout out to just where you can find out about things, Sterling Volunteers, Meals on Wheels. So you can visit our websites, sterlingvolunteers.com, and you can also go to mealsonwheelsamerica.org to learn more. But yes, Katie, Sharron, thank you so much for joining me today on Sterling Live. It was a tremendous episode. And, I learned a lot. I know our audience learned a lot. So yeah, I just want to take this time to thank the both of you for joining me.
Well, hey, thank you so much. This was awesome. A lot of fun. The one thing I'll have to say is I have a new kitten. Her name is Luna Bell, and I'm just happy that she's napping during this entire thing. I was a little worried she was going to make an appearance, and then everyone was going to die of like cuteness overload, but she is napping. So, but anyway, thank you. This was an amazing opportunity. Meals on Wheels America values our partnership with Sterling Volunteers, and I look forward to kind of more learning events for our members because, like I said, they do get a lot out of that. So thank you for inviting us.
Thank you so much, Sharron. We so appreciate it.
Yes, thank you both. And thank you to our live audience and those watching on demand. We will see you on the next Sterling Live. But again, thank you both. And I hope everyone has a wonderful day.
Thank you.